Greetings, friends. Welcome back to another Bible chat. Today I'm going to talk with Tony Wolterman about Noah, which I hope is a story all of you know. But first, would you like to say a little bit about you and your background?
Yes, I'm been a Catholic all my life. I currently work at St. Vincent de Paul, which sees to the need of the poor in the community. And I also work at Stephen Ministry, which helps hurting people who needs Christ's love. In addition to that, for most of my life, I've been a scientist. And one of my major hobbies is history. I have literally studied hundreds of history texts. Some of the history texts have been by atheists, and some have been by very devout Catholics. I find the ones with the atheists, they tend to believe that science will solve everything, and the world is just sort of one cosmic accident. Everything just happened, and it continues to happen just by happenstance, if you will. With respect to religion without reason, I find that's superstition. So I think you need to marry the two and have them together. And I find that being Catholic and being a scientist are mutually compatible, that they actually help each other. And I thought that going over the parable or the tale or the story of Noah would be a very good place to start, because Noah has been criticized by many scientists as a little bit more than superstition from the past.
Well, I will mention that I was excited that you called me about this because my father was a scientist, and I'm going to show you some of the things he wrote later. But and I was going to tell you, I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but this is his, this is the book most people know him by.
Oh, Electron Spin Resonance, yeah. I've met him, by the way, at one of your parties.
You met him at one of the parties, and here is his, I'm doing this to demonstrate that he's not just a person who says he's a scientist, but he's really got like a degree in education. He is actually a world-class scientist. This is his book in Japanese.
Okay.
The only word in it is
I
his
can't
name.
read that one, okay.
The only English word is his name. And here, he was all into magnets. He was a magnetic.
Oh, okay. Magnetic.
And a funny story about him is that when my mother got sick, my mother had a lot of health problems, but after one of them, they put her in one of those MRIs, I guess they're called.
Right.
So I was with my father at some other time, and we met a mutual friend, and the friend said, "Oh, Dr. Poole, how's your wife?" And so he starts telling her all about how she was in the magnetic thing, and how all the magnetics work, and how everything was so exciting to see the magnets. And then the man said, or the woman said, "Well, but how is your wife?" So the magnets were more exciting than the health for that moment.
I had a nice chat with him at the party.
Exactly. So anyway, this has been a big thing for my father also, is that religion and science do not contradict.
Good.
Okay, so would you like to tell me about Noah?
Well, I'll give you the cliff version of Noah. The
world
at that time was corrupt. There was a lot of bad things going on, and God began to rethink, did he really want to create this thing called man? Because it really didn't look like it was working out too well. But he noticed there was one family who was very just, and that was Noah and his offspring. And he said, well, for the sake of Noah, I will sort of spare at least part of the society. So he told Noah to build an ark and put the animals, all the animals on earth, on the ark, as well as your relatives. And then there will be a gigantic flood that will flood the earth. And the flood came after Noah built the ark, of course, and it floated them up for above all of the mountains on earth for about 40 days and 40 nights.
Well, it's rained for 40 days and 40 nights.
Rained
So then it was
40
up for
days.
like 150 or something.
About 100 and some days.
Something.
Good. Keep me honest here. But at any rate, less than a year anyway.
Right.
The whole thing, the whole level of the water rose and then subsided.
Right.
And then Noah sent a raven or a dove out to check to see if things were okay. Well, the first time the dove came right back and it clearly wasn't ready yet. I think a week later he sent it out again. It came back with a twig of a olive in its mouth. And then next time it didn't come back at all, so he knew that the water subsided, it was safe to land, and as I understand it, at least the way the legend is, that he landed on Mount Arafat,
Right.
and he and his family were saved. And then after that, he set up a community, and I guess they were fruitful and multiplied and populated the earth, as well as the animals there populated the earth. And then had a little bit of funny twist to it, is that Noah was a farmer and he planted all these grapes. Well, he didn't realize the strength of the grapes, and one day he got totally snookered. And when that happened, he, I think they put it in his nakedness, was in a tent, and one of his sons came in and made fun of him. And the other two came in and treated with him with respect and covered him up and made him till he came to the next morning. And then he heard the story of the son that disrespected him, and he made him an outcast. Mm-hmm. And I guess that sort of brings out the treat your older people well, which I can better relate to every year, believe me. But at any rate, the question then has, from a scientific point of view, could the earth be flooded, let's just say within a year's period of time, almost like filling a bathtub around the whole earth, and then drained it? All the scientific evidence, all the geological evidence, all the historical evidence from that period indicates that never did happen.
You know what is curious, though, is that many other cultures have the same myth.
Exactly.
So it seems like it's not inconceivable that there was some major flood somewhere.
In fact, it's very likely that there was an area flood, or could have been an area flood, because at that time, whenever that was, the date varies quite a bit. In fact, one bishop, Bishop Usher, who was an Episcopalian and an Anglican, actually came out with a date. He said it landed on Mount Arafat in the year 2348 BC on a Wednesday. Now, you know, he used to be Gots to get all that business, so he probably was winging it, to say the least. But at any rate, that varies. When Noah did exist, if he existed, would vary quite a bit depending on who you want to read.
Right.
But it is very likely. In fact, the first novel that was ever written, I read, it was called The Epic of Gilgamesh. And Gilgamesh, to give you a real quick version of that, Gilgamesh was very distraught because his best friend died, and he sought to become immortal. He sought out the gods, and one of the tests the gods gave him was to build an ark and save people from the flood. He put all the people on the ark, he put the animals on the ark, and then he floated up when the flood waters came. And then he even went so far as to put the raven and the dove out the window to test when it was ready to land. So it was eerily similar to the, if you will, the story of Noah. So the bottom line is, it could well happen. In fact, at that time, there were ice floes that were breaking we were just coming out of the last great ice age. And there were ice flows that were breaking and were flooding the land. The sea level was going up, and sometimes catastrophically. Actually, England was separated from Europe at that time by probably the Great Lakes ice floe breaking and the water just pouring over whatever civilization was there at the time.
Wait, you mean England used to be part of Europe?
Used to be contiguous with
Really?
Europe. And think how that changed history.
Was Ireland too?
Oh, yeah. I suspect Ireland. They didn't mention Ireland. But the Black Sea probably was formed by that. So the floods, the rising water in those days, if you will,
right.
It really did happen. Now, did they just take these type of stories from back when? And I think Genesis was supposed to be written around the year 1000, which is a good deal later.
Right.
And they just take these combination of stories and turn it into a parable, which is a moral story. Or was there a real Noah and actually some of this stuff happened?
Right.
Clearly all of it didn't.
Right.
But anyway, the parable of Noah has some very important morals to it.
Yep.
Would you like that?
Well, I was going to say something that was interesting to me is that for all of you who have not ever gone to the Easter Vigil, do you go to the Easter Vigil Mass?
Yeah.
Well, if you haven't gone to the Easter Vigil, you don't know what you're missing. You're going to want to go. But there are 7 Old Testament readings that go through all of the people, and Noah is not one of them. You'll like to know that. Noah
He missed the cut.
He missed the cut,
All
so
right.
I thought you would like to know that.
Okay.
However, Noah is mentioned in the Easter Vigil, but he's mentioned when they bless the baptismal water.
Okay.
So the whole Noah story in the church, a good way to see how the church looks at people, places, things, events, is to see how they use them in the liturgy. And in the liturgy, Noah is used as an example as a baptism, like a prefigurement of baptism.
Yeah.
Because the world was cleansed by water.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was very interesting. And then one of the other things that Noah is used for, another thing is, how does Jesus use the story? And Jesus uses the story of Noah basically to say, I'm not going to read them to you, but Matthew and Luke, you need to always be ready. You never know when the Lord's going to come back. Always be ready.
The bottom line is that in those days, if you will, in antiquity, one of the greatest learning tools was parables.
Well, Jake, I did look for this quote and I couldn't find it. I looked a half an hour before I was going to come here because I forgot to look earlier. But I recall specifically Tolkien saying this, and it sounds like he would say it, so I'm going to say it, that you can teach deeper truths with fiction than you can with facts.
It's probably true.
And I think there's some depth to that.
Jesus used parables.
Yes.
The Good Samaritan, the
Right.
workers in the vineyard, he used that constantly
That's
in his
right.
teachings.
That's right.
So that being
Yeah.
said, what is the moral of the story or do you want me to say what the moral
Well,
of the
one
story?
moral of the story is we should always be ready. Just you don't know when whatever's going to happen. You need to always be ready. You need to trust God and do what He says, even if He says build an ark when you don't have any idea what that's about. So those are 2 of the morals. So what would you say then when it's?
I'd say another major moral that comes to me, a real meaning of this is God said, if you trust in me, I will take care of you
Right.
as my people, as
Right.
my church.
Right.
And when you think about it, He sure has, because since, let's say, over the last 4 millennia, the church has not only existed in the Judeo-Christian tradition, it's flourished all over
Right.
the world.
And even when there are a lot of bad people in and out of the church, it has still continued to.
Yeah, in
Yeah.
fact, the story I recently read a couple histories of the time near the middle of the 1800s, at the end of the Papal States.
Mm-hmm.
Pius IX was in charge. Pius IX was a good man, and maybe even a holy man, but he was about as well equipped to run a country as he wasn't even well equipped to run a church picnic. I mean, the guy was totally out of his element, and the administration there was totally corrupt. It was totally a train wreck. And a Jewish scholar came into town, and he came into Rome to determine, just to study things. And they showed him around, and when he was finished, he came to the priest and he said, "Father, I wish to be baptized." And Father said, "Okay, I'll baptize you. But you got to tell me one thing. You've seen this mess here. Why do you want to be a Catholic after seeing this?" And he said, "I figure that if you guys can mess this thing up so bad, and this church has existed for 2 millennia, there must be a loving God that's taking care of you."
Good story.
And it's a good story. It was put in the book. I don't think it was a lot of factual here, but it's, again, a parable, right? A parable.
Right, that's right.
But that's the moral I more or less get at. In fact, you remember the rainbow.
Right.
In fact, whenever you look out and you see a rainbow, you think that God has made the covenant that He will take care of His people and He will take care of His church.
And I'm glad you said the word covenant, because something else interesting is that's the first use of the word covenant in Scripture, is with Noah.
Oh, okay.
And so Noah is when, one storyline in Scripture is God is searching for man to bring him back to himself. And so that is one of the stories that God came down and had a covenant with Noah. The other thing that Catechism uses, by the way, I also want to just mention the Catechism. Where are my catechisms? Here they are. Don't start reading the Catechism at night, because if you start reading it at night, you will never fall asleep. It is so exciting.
Really?
Yes.
I'll put your word for that.
Anyway, the Catechism uses it also to emphasize that salvation is for everybody, not just the Jews at that time, but then also not just even the Christians. Salvation is offered to everyone.
For everyone. I couldn't agree more. And that's so it's such an important message. But whenever you see that rainbow out there, just think, put your trust in God, and He will take care of His people.
Right, that's great. So I do want to just say a little thing about science and religion. So my father, as I mentioned, was a scientist, and no matter where we are in our intellect, in our interest, in our talents, it's fine to grapple with the faith. That's not a bad thing. You can grapple with the faith. Jacob wrestled with God. Mm-hmm. And so my father actually grappled with these things. So I'm going to show you some of the things my father wrote. He wrote Science and the Eucharist. How?
Okay.
And what does that even, how? I mean, he actually wrote an article. He has the in here somewhere. I thought it was in here. He looks at even what the molecular composition of bread versus flesh. He actually did that.
I have my own wrestling and thought that through, and I'm very comfortable with it, but that's a story for another time.
And then this, I don't even know what this means, but this is called the irreducible tensors and the Trinity. Do you even know what irreducible tensors are? I don't even know what they are.
No, I can't say, but he was a physicist.
He was a physicist. So. But this is interesting. A theological scientific approach to the problem of Mary's perpetual virginity. So he thought, as a scientist, how could this have happened? I mean, he actually thought about this. He actually wrote about it. That's how he grappled with things by writing. That's how he did it.
Okay. Well, I certainly have thought through a few of these things myself. And again, that's just another story for another time. But you mentioned once on the Trinity, and sometimes my knowledge of science, particularly nuclear science, helps me deal with that, because you can't grasp the whole thing all at once, but you can use aspects of it that are very useful to be used. Even though it might not be the whole truth, it's useful.
Right. But it is important, that the church does teach the science and religion do not contradict each other. And, it is important for us to not just refuse to think about these things. We can think about these things. Okay. Any other final thoughts?
I think we've said it all.
Well, before we go, I forgot to show you the Bible. I show you a Bible every time. I know if I didn't show one, I'd get an email from somebody saying, you didn't show me a Bible. So this is the Bible I have to show today. And this is a Bible that somebody donated to our parish, and I couldn't bear to give it away because the binding is interesting. I don't know if you can see this, but there's actually metal. It's kind of like a permanent 3-ring binder sort of thing, and it's permanent. And so it has these 2 holes with metal, the metal down through. But I also always show people this because...
So you can tear out pages?
Well, you know, the back actually is clearly the last few are gone because this is the Lives of the Saints and it ends in November. But also, I want to show you this. I always show this to people. I do know that this is not the practical experience of most people. But I do always point out, if I can, that the church never actually taught that the lay people should not be reading the Bible. And I will, by the way, whoever had this Bible didn't write any names in this name section, which is sort of sad. But this actually has the indulgence. The church gives you an indulgence if you read the Bible for half an hour. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
Yes, and this has been true a long time, but this is published in 1958. So in 1958, this Bible is not only encouraging people to read the Bible, but they're actually saying to you, if you read the Bible for, let's see, it doesn't have a time, that you will get an indulgence. Also, it also has the Pope's letter telling you should read the Bible. Pope Pius VII.
No, the 12th.
12. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm reading upside down. Thank you. I'm upside down. It's urging the study of the sacred scripture. So I just always point that out. I do know for a fact that many priests, this didn't filter down to the local priests, and many priests did do the opposite of encourage reading scripture, and I do realize that. But I just always let people know the church never actually said that.
To show you, I also have a Bible, and it's embarrassing that it creaks when I open it, because when I do want to read something from the Bible, I usually do it on my iPad. But unfortunately, priests bless Bibles, but they don't bless iPads. Is that right? So, at any rate, I do have a Bible, so there you go.
So
but I rarely use it.
So good. So, we're glad you came. Thank you for coming. And this has been fascinating. We didn't talk about Noah maybe as much as we talked about other things like science. But it's good.
Noah is a parable, and it is a message they're bringing
There's a
forth.
message. That's right.
Not the strict history, or the Lord only knows, not the technical aspect.
And I'm glad you said that too, just to remind you that the Bible has many different kinds of literature. It does have historical books. It does have poetry. It does have parables and myths, and it does have all of these different kinds of things. And part of the discernment as you're reading scripture is to see what exactly is the author trying to tell us and what is God trying to tell us.
There you go.
Okay. All righty. Well, God bless you, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.